Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A video number 67. Make sure to keep asking questions. Doesn't matter what they're about, they can be about anything. Just know I don't respond to review requests or Let's Play requests in these videos, but I'll respond to those in the comments. If you're wondering what that is, it's basically what do you think about insert game here. That's really an MTO or review request, not a question for a Q&A. If you have a specific question about a game, like a feature or something surrounding it in the news or something like that, then that might be a Q&A question, but it's ultimately just going to depend on what you ask. Please remember that not all questions are going to get answered in Q&As. Things that I can answer with a simple yes or no and not much else are probably not good Q&A material. The gameplay in the background is of Smite. I've been trying it out because I got a humble bundle with a bunch of multiplayer game stuff in it, and one of the things in there was a skin for Smite, so I decided, you know what, I give it a shot. Worst case scenarios, it's like any other MOBA and I can't stand it, but best case scenario, the change in perspective and more direct control ends up being a boon. But I'll get more into that when I get to the final question. For now, let's go ahead and go over a question from Ice Age Penguin Race. What are your expectations of the upcoming game No Man's Sky? Do you think it brings something new and original to the table in gaming, unlike the same old boring modern military FPS games we have nowadays? Well, obviously it is a massive breath of fresh air to have a space exploration game being such a big focus for the year, considering that the genre was all but dead only a few years ago until basically Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous started bringing things back. Now we're getting No Man's Sky, which definitely looks like a very interesting game. I'm very curious to see how it turns out, but I don't really know what my expectations are right now because it's a very small studio working on it. I can't help but wonder if that's going to negatively affect the development, but what I'm basically expecting out of it is pretty much what they advertise. I want to be able to explore strange new worlds and engage in space battles and all kinds of things like that, and we'll see how it turns out, I guess. I mean, if nothing else, it'll give me an excuse to use this joystick I've had sitting on my desk for a while now, which has only seen major use with Elite Dangerous and a little bit of use with the teaser gameplay demo for Overload, which I have a gameplay clip of if you're interested. But other than that, I haven't really been able to get much of a chance to use the joystick lately. I haven't really installed any of my old flight sims or anything like that, and it'll definitely be refreshing to be able to use it again. Anyway, let's move on to a question from Marfadude. Do you think we need more Vietnam War games, especially a strategic or third-person Vietnam War game? Well, it's not so much that we just need more of that particular setting, it's that we need games that are actually good. Because the closest we've had to an actually good Vietnam War game is the game Viet Cong, which isn't really a very good game. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's better than something like Shell Shock Nam 67, but that's not really saying much. And the only strategy game I can think of set in the Vietnam War off the top of my head anyway is Men of War Vietnam, which I haven't had a chance to play yet, so I have no idea how that is. But yes, it definitely needs more representation in the gaming scene, specifically from good games, because it's hard to do a good Vietnam War game. Hell, it's hard to do a good Vietnam War movie, actually, because nobody really truly understands what it was like being in Vietnam except the veterans. So it's pretty hard to understand and relate to a situation like that unless you actually are a veteran, because if you're not, and especially if you're younger and you don't understand the political climate of the time, then it might just go completely over your head. Maybe Rising Storm 2 will break the funk we've been in with really crappy Vietnam War games, and Rising Storm 2 comes along and it's suddenly amazing, but we'll have to just wait and see on that one. At least it has a pretty good shot at it, though. Moving on to a question from Sir Triops King. What were some of your earliest gaming memories, and how were your standards on gaming different from what you consider these days? Well, if you want to get technical, my first gaming memories were with more analog things like card games or board games or sports. But of course I know you mean video games in this particular context, and my earliest experiences with those are in arcades and with the Atari 2600. Unfortunately, I didn't really have much access to arcade games in the actual heyday of the arcades, but that of course didn't stop me from getting in some arcade gameplay over the years, although mostly with arcades I actually played pinball machines, oddly enough. If you're younger, you've probably never actually played an actual pinball machine, but those things are friggin' awesome. It's really an experience you just have to try for yourself. If you do get the chance to play an actual pinball machine, I very highly recommend it. It's actually a lot of fun, particularly if you actually enjoy digital pinball as well, because you've got that primer, you know how to play the game basically. You just need to translate your keyboard and such skills to an actual machine instead. It's pretty easy jump, but you do need to get used to the actual tilting stuff. But anyway, the earliest I can really remember distinctly with regards to video games was on Atari 2600, where the absolute most time I spent playing that thing was spent playing friggin' Missile Command, which is still actually one of my favorite games of all time, just purely on nostalgia factor and pure simplicity. It's just something you can lose a ridiculous amount of time in if you let it. But I actually played a lot of Atari games, and I actually still have the Atari 2600 that I played all those on. It's not hooked up right now because it's a pain in the ass to set that thing up on modern TVs and such, but it actually still works just fine. It's in really good condition. I've actually still got some of the games in their original boxes, although the boxes themselves are a bit banged up these days. But then again, they have been very well used over the years, so I guess it's a good thing that they're in as good condition as they are, even though that condition isn't exactly the best. But anyway, there were other arcade games that I played both on Atari and actual arcade stuff. I played Pac-Man arcade machine, and in Atari, the arcade machine is way better. Oddly enough, I didn't get a chance to play Asteroids until much more recently. I went to a convention where they actually had a bunch of arcade machines there, and one of the machines there was actually an original Asteroids arcade cabinet, so I finally got a chance to play that in the actual arcade as opposed to on my Atari instead. So it's just kind of weird how things like that work out and how your memories compare to some of the stuff you experienced more recently. And back then, it was just so much easier to really get caught up in the moment and be like, oh man, this technology is crazy, and see how everything was advancing. I mean, I watched the gaming world go from basically wireframe and just plain old pixels themselves to actual EGA and VGA graphics and finally 3D, and now we've got all kinds of crazy stuff going on. But over the years and over the course of a lot of getting burned by companies, I have become very, very jaded. And it's actually kind of funny to think about how my standards have evolved over time. It used to be that we were getting newer games that were actually coming out with huge technological advances. We were getting games that were coming out with new control schemes, new consoles, all that sort of thing. So it was very easy to get caught up in this stream of your standards going higher and higher and higher, until finally we hit this kind of plateau with the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 generation. And now with the current console generation, it's almost like the industry has decided, you know what, our standards need to be lower, and so the industry itself is lowering the standards while the players are still keeping their standards up really high, and thus newer games just aren't really cutting it anymore. They settle for mediocrity and not much else. Sure, some actually get away from that, but most of them end up getting stuck in that rut, and thus our standards are just in this weird limbo state where they want to go up, but they kinda can't because the industry won't let them. And I guess that's where things have changed from back then to now as far as my standards on gaming. They kept getting higher until they finally hit a point where I'm just kind of like, okay, if the industry can actually get higher than that, that's great. If not, well, it kind of sucks, actually. So I guess we'll see what happens. It's always in flux. Obviously, my standards are going to keep going up if the industry keeps going up in its own quality standards. But if it just stays where it is, then that's a pretty big problem. But enough about rambling on the past. Let's move on to a question from Zozo Gogo. Do you think we'll ever get a good female superhero movie? Why haven't we gotten any good ones yet? I honestly don't know why we haven't gotten any good ones, because there's plenty of great female superheroes out there. I mean, the one that immediately comes to mind is Wonder Woman. And why we haven't had a good Wonder Woman movie is utterly beyond me, because pretty much everybody loves her. I mean, you ask people for their top 5 superheroes, and chances are Wonder Woman's probably gonna be in there somewhere. Or at least top 10. I mean, we might get a Wonder Woman movie now that the whole Batman vs. Superman thing is over, but we'll just have to wait and see on that, I guess. But the current trend seems to be to put them in superhero team movies. So you'll have, for example, the Avengers with Black Widow, or the Scarlet Witch like they put in Avengers 2, and so on and so forth. Or with the Fantastic Four And I mean, they're a superhero team to begin with, so obviously they would be all put together. But there's X-Men, all these various superhero teams that tend to get pretty solid movies, generally speaking. Fantastic Four being pretty much the major exception there, and X-Men has had some really bad ones over the years. But I honestly don't know why we don't see a lot of female superhero movies, and more importantly, why, if we do see them, they aren't really any good. I mean, Joss Whedon generally does a hell of a job with female characters. Maybe we should get him on that and get him writing for, say, Wonder Woman, or, I don't know, Batgirl or something like that. Or hell, get him onto a Titans movie so at the very least we can have Starfire and Raven, although I'm a bit biased in that regard because Raven's my favorite superhero. But then again, that's doing the team thing again, although to be fair, Raven and Starfire never really had their own run of things, so there is that. But anyway, I'm digressing here. Point is, Hollywood, stop being total crap and get a good female superhero movie out there. You got plenty to choose from, so I'm not exactly picky here, but come on, pick somebody and put her in a really good superhero movie instead of a really crappy one like Elektra. Although to be fair, the Daredevil movie sucked too, but that's beside the point. Anyway, let's move on to the final question, which is from Dragoneye, and this is where it ties in with Smite. Does your opinion on some games ever change over time? Very rarely does that happen, and when it does happen, it's mostly with regards to some things that I looked at a long time ago, and I actually barely remember them, if at all. And so I think to myself, hey, I'll go back to that and try it out and see if it's as good or as bad as I remember it, depending on what it is. And depending on the game, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that's why I stopped playing that. Or it's a matter of, oh yeah, this game actually isn't as good as I remember it. With the prime example there being Oblivion, and you guys pretty much know how that went. And that's one of the things I'm doing with my Redux series, actually. I'm going back to some of my really old reviews and basically bringing them up to the current standards, and that includes my standards of scrutiny, because my standards of scrutiny prior to about 2011 or 2012 simply weren't as advanced as they are now. I have a much more critical perspective on games now than I did when I actually started doing this whole YouTube thing, and it really does show. I mean, hell, I go back to some of my really old reviews and I actually cringe at them because of the way the audio is garbage or the way I didn't edit them very well or any number of things like that. And I'm just like, you know what, I really need to remake some of these. In fact, if it weren't for the behemoth known as Fallout 4 taking up the vast majority of my gaming time because I want to get it over with, I probably would have actually finished a couple of the Reduxes that I had been working on and now basically put on the back burner for the time being. But anyway, the point is that it really does depend on the game. Some games hold up very well, some of them don't. Some of them have massive amounts of technical problems that didn't exist when I originally looked at them or things like that. There's all kinds of reasons that they might change a bit, but normally when I'm actually doing these Reduxes, the most of the scores would probably change, if there is a score change at all, would probably be about 0.5 instead of what you might think. So don't think I'm going to go back to an old video that I've done that you raged at because I said one thing or another about a game that you liked or the game that you hated, and be like, oh, well, this time he's going to say exactly what I wanted him to say. Fact is that I only start working on a Redux when I'm actually absolutely certain that it's something I really want to do. So, for example, I did a Redux of Bad Company 2 because it was very appropriate to do it with the original Bad Company in the newer reviews. And so I went back to it and I went into it with a fairly fresh perspective, although I had the original experience in the back of my mind the whole time going, okay, this is what's different. And so just because I'm doing a Redux on something, don't expect a score change automatically. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes they stay exactly the same. Prime example there being Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, which didn't get a score change, but the video that I put out more recently is way higher quality than my original video was. But anyway, you may be wondering, but DW, how does this tie into Smite? Well, you guys may know that I really hate MOBAs. Obviously, Smite is a MOBA. It's played from a different perspective from League of Legends and Dota, but it's definitely a MOBA. And thanks to a multiplayer game Humble Bundle, I ended up with a skin for Smite, so I'm like, you know what, I might as well give it a shot. I know a few people who play it, so I got into the game, I added them to friends list and things like that. And so I've been giving it a fairly good shot. Right now I'm about level 10, and that actually speaks volumes because other MOBAs I couldn't stand playing for more than about an hour without just rage quitting. Don't get me wrong, Smite is not devoid of irritation, but I've definitely been able to get more into it than I have with other ones. So we'll see where this goes. I do plan on doing a video on Smite in itself eventually, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. Right now I'm basically trying it out as a free-to-play player just to see how the grind is, and then maybe if I actually continue to be able to enjoy to some degree at least, I might actually pick up the Ultimate God Pack, and that basically is just buying the game itself. One thing I definitely applaud them on is the idea that they basically sell all the meaningful content of the game, all of the characters that you can get, for one lump sum. They have a pack that is called the Ultimate God Pack, and you can get that, and you get every single character that is in the game right then and there, and then you also get immediate access to every single character that they introduce to the game later on. And it's basically $30 for that. So you're basically paying for what is effectively a middle market title in terms of the actual game price, and you're getting all of the main content right for that. If you want to get any of the cosmetic stuff, you basically have to pay extra, or you had to grind for it or something like that. But it remains to be seen how much that will irritate me over time. We'll just have to wait and see. But again, Smite is a prime example of a game where my opinion changed on it over time. I originally just basically wrote it off as just another MOBA, and then I'm like, you know what, I have the skin for it, I might as well try it. And over the time I've been playing it, I'm like, you know what, this actually is a bit different. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it, because the MOBA gameplay actually isn't what I've been playing for the most part. Mostly I've just been playing the arena mode, which is basically nothing like a normal MOBA. It's really a deathmatch mode more than anything else. But other than that, it's actually gotten better over time. And by better, I mean I don't hate it, which for a MOBA is actually a fairly big deal. I don't hate it, but I'm not entirely sure I like it yet. So we'll just have to wait and see how that goes, but my opinion has been changing over time, and it has yet to really settle, so we'll just see. Anyway, that was Q&A 67. Make sure to keep asking questions. I can't do these without questions, so please ask questions, and I will catch you guys in later videos.